even if you know that they're talking to you because you're paying them, when you feel a bit lonely, or maybe when you're having a bad day, like talking to somebody just makes you feel good.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Beyond Borders podcast, where I sit down weekly with guests from all around the world to chat culture, dating, and human experiences. So join in and let's break down those barriers together. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode. Today I'm going to chat with Yuta from the YouTube channel That Japanese Man Yuta. Yuta and I met years ago in Toronto while he was traveling around North America, and his channel has now over 1 million subscribers, and it is all about the Japanese culture and language. So, welcome, Yuta. I'm super excited to chat to you about one of the most fascinating and unique cultures out there, and yeah, get your perspective on it.
Hey, good to see you again.
Good to see you as well. And yeah, how long has it been since we saw each other?
It's been many years. I don't even remember.
Yeah, I think it's definitely been over 4 or 5 4 years. No, six
It
years.
was pre COVID for
It was
sure.
definitely. Yeah, and then it just makes you think like how long have we been doing YouTube for? It's a long time.
Yeah. I still remember when you didn't have so many subscribers.
I know. I remember when you had less subscribers as well. It's yeah, it's the work involved in running the YouTube channel is it's another podcast. You're someone that's very interesting because you travel a lot. Like I think when we met, you how long were you traveling for at that time? Was it just continuous for a couple of years?
Yeah, it was more or less continuous. Yeah, for a few years. But I've been to like 40 countries. So yeah, I'm very well traveled.
And what is your favorite country?
That's a very hard question to answer.
But
I like tropical countries, you know.
same, same, 100%. People say like, I love Iceland. I enjoyed it so much. It's so beautiful. I'm like, it's too cold. It's too cold for me.
Yeah,
Anything that's too cold, I'm like, I can't fully appreciate the beauty of it. But it's
yeah.
interesting as well when you travel that long because the people I love interviewing the most are the people that really have been all around because it kind of puts more of an awareness of where you come from and your culture. And then you kind of get to think, why is my culture like this? Or maybe in your case, you always think like, how Japanese am I? You know, do, does that come to your mind?
Yeah, but what happens when you travel so much is you kind of like adjust to each local culture. So you start forgetting how things are in your own country sometimes. So if I'm in Japan, I have to kind of readjust to how Japanese people, what they do and how things are. So that's quite interesting.
Do you sometimes act in a certain way and then you think, oh my God, that was so Japanese of me? Like maybe like the indirect way of speaking, or, some cultures are very, very straightforward, like very direct. And how does that make you feel?
No, actually, so I have my technique to in terms of directness or indirectness, right? Because sometimes I just go to a random country and start dating, and I have no idea what people how people are. So what I do is I start from indirect communication. And if that doesn't work, I kind of like make it less indirect and more direct until they get it, because indirect communication is less likely to be offensive, rude. If you start with like a direct communication, you can come across as pretty like a rude. So I feel like it's always safer to start with indirect communication, and then you just increase your directness if it doesn't work.
So, for anyone that doesn't really understand the idea of indirectness, how would that go? Let's say if you're interested in a woman, like you wouldn't say to her, I find you attractive. Let's go out. Like you kind of go around it.
Um, Well, the easiest way of is just to ask her out. You can just say, "Oh, hey, let's grab coffee or something like that," and I think that works pretty well in many different cultures. It certainly works in Japan and certainly works in Canada, I suppose.
When you come back to Japan, you must kind of be faced with this reverse culture shock. Seeing like how people live, how people interact. What is something that you find that, first of all, you love about the Japanese culture? Well, let's start with a positive.
There's many things I like about Japanese culture, but one of the things is how we have so much, like, we have so many varieties of things. Just going to a convenience store, you have just so many different types of snacks, drinks, and everything. So that's very fun. And also, like, I like the how Japanese people are pretty good at quality control. Just buying some random stuff from a supermarket, appliances and everything. I think Japan has a top-notch quality control, so that's also interesting. And I would also say we can be very creative. So when it comes to like just about anything, products, anime, manga, things like that, we can be very creative. So we have a lot of different types of entertainment, So I never get bored when I'm in Japan.
Are you from Tokyo originally, or where are you from?
I'm actually not from Tokyo. I'm from Western Japan. But the Tokyo area is the longest I've lived.
Okay, and Tokyo is definitely, like, if you're looking for anything you want to find, I think Tokyo is the best place to go.
Yeah,
I
it's
feel like,
very fun to be in Tokyo. Constant entertainment, so much stuff to do.
is there any culture shock, or let's say reverse culture shock, that you're faced with when you come back to Japan?
It's not so much a culture shock, but like a readjustment. So one of the things I noticed about dating in Japan is gender roles, how men and women are supposed to act in terms of dating. For example, in general in Japan, men are supposed to make plans when you want to go on a date. It's more like it's more like it's kind of like you're pitching a dating idea to a woman, and they might judge you based on your idea, because it's not like you can just do whatever you want. You have to correctly guess what the woman likes, and you have to come up with the plan accordingly.
And how do you guess what she likes?
So you can ask questions. It's not as hard as it may sound. You can just ask her, "Oh, what kind of food do you like? What kind of places do you want to go?" Like things like that. You can ask her interests, hobbies, things like that. So yeah, it's not that hard, but
And then based on that, basically, you have to come up with a plan that she will enjoy.
yeah, and it's better. Generally speaking, it's better to come up with a plan, because sometimes you can just meet somewhere, and you can just be spontaneous, right? And I actually have this episode from many years ago in Japan. So I asked this girl out, and when we went on a date, and we were planning to eat at a Thai restaurant, but I wasn't very hungry, so I suggested, "Oh, I'm not super hungry, so maybe we can just take a walk around." And she looked quite surprised, because we have planned, you know, our plan was to eat at the Thai restaurant, and now I'm saying a different thing. So when I saw her reaction, I was like, okay, I'm in Japan. Maybe I just have to follow our plan. So that was pretty interesting.
That's such a huge difference when it comes to a lot of the foreign girls, right? Because they're just like, okay, well, let's walk, right? It's like spontaneous, and then we can see what happens. But Japanese girls, they really plan for the date, I suppose.
Yeah, of course, there are individual differences. So not every Japanese woman is like that. But yeah, there's definitely this tendency that we prefer to stick with our plan.
Hmm. And I mean, times are changing as well, but the fact that the man is still like the leader, he's still the one that's asserting himself and planning the dates. Is that still relevant nowadays?
Yeah, at least in the beginning of the whole dating stage, because when you actually get to know somebody, the dynamics can change.
Hmm.
So, but yeah, at least in the beginning, it's it is mostly the case that men would come up with a plan.
And when it comes to paying, who pays in Japan?
So paying is interesting. There's no actually strict rule. So it can be anything, but there's something that we do in Japan, which is like men pay a little more. So for example, we go eat at a restaurant, and yeah, it's like 5,000 yen, which is about like maybe $40, something like that. I might just pay like I might just pay like 4,000 yen, and I let the girl pay like 1,000 yen. So it's not an
Mm,
even split, but it's kind of a split, and that's something that a lot of people do in Japan.
interesting. And why is it that? Because you either see like, okay, let's go half and half, let's go Dutch, or the man covers the whole bill. But why just give her like, 1,000 yen to cover when it doesn't really make a much difference to your pocket?
I think my guess is it's about being a little considerate, because if the guy pays everything, maybe the woman feel a little. It's like she has to do something in return. So to
Mm.
not make the woman feel obligated to do things, maybe you could let her pay just a little bit.
Okay, interesting. So it's the fact that she doesn't want to feel like she owes you something if you cover
Yeah,
the whole bill. Like you're so macho and you're so almost with like some expectation. When it comes to meeting people in Japan, how easy is it?
it's definitely more difficult than many other countries, especially in the Tokyo area, because the thing about Tokyo people, which this doesn't necessarily apply to people from different prefectures and regions in Japan, but especially people in Tokyo, a lot of them are very uncomfortable with talking to strangers. They're very
Mm.
cautious, and that obviously makes it difficult to meet new people, right? And now we have apps, dating apps in Japan, but it took us a very long time. Like it took Japanese people a very long time to be comfortable enough to use dating apps.
Why
So we
why
are
is that?
because a lot of them are afraid of meeting strangers, especially complete strangers. They have no idea who they are. So even like dating apps in Japan, like Japanese dating apps, are very different from like American dating apps. Japanese dating apps tend to have much more information. For example, Tinder is a good example. Like Tinder started out as just photos, and if people write a bio, they're not gonna write a lot. So you have very little information other than photos, and a lot of people are comfortable using it. But Japanese dating apps are very different, because when you create your profile, they ask you for a lot of information, like uh, your height, your weight, and often your income as well, which I think is pretty interesting. Your hobbies, things like that. There's so much information on on Japanese dating apps.
So that's interesting because those are the things that are considered important. Like, in Canada, like height is mentioned and maybe your occupation, but you can be kind of, you don't have to be very concrete about what you do. You can just say, I'm an entrepreneur, right? Like, I don't know how much money you make as an entrepreneur, right? But it's interesting that in Japan, that's important, obviously, how much a man makes. Of course, it's important in many places around the world, but to put that into an app, like a woman is going to judge a man based on that right away.
Yeah. So, well, there's a word, there's this expression, high context culture and low context culture, meaning in high context culture, uh, things tend to be implicit, but people prefer having a lot of background information because our communication is indirect. So you need more context to understand things. So that's why on dating apps, Japanese people prefer having a lot of information. So they are more interested in marriage than dating. And a lot of them are pretty upfront about it. For example, even on Tinder, a lot of people write that, oh, I'm looking for a marriage partner.
That's
And
so rare. That's so yeah.
Match.com,
Mm-hmm.
right? So at some point, so they have local versions. So the American version, Canadian version are very different from the Japanese version. At some point, I'm not sure if that's the case, right now, but Match.com in Japan, they emphasize marriage. It's written on their like a top page, like it's for people who want to get married. So culturally, it seems like more Japanese people are interested in marriage, and they tend to be very upfront about it.
So if you go out with a woman, would she upfront tell you, look, I'm looking for something very serious that can lead to a marriage?
Yeah, pretty much. Like you don't have to like they don't even have to tell you because they write it on their profile, so you already know.
Okay. So you're basically dating seriously from that point on, because in North America it's very rare, at least from the woman's side, it's very rare to find a man who writes marriage, looking for marriage. As soon as you see that, you think, what's wrong with him? And it's not because you don't want the same thing, because a lot of women, a lot of us do, but it's just so weird. It's so rare to see that all of a sudden you think, why did he write that? He could have just written relationship, but marriage, he's immediately looking for marriage. So that's interesting. And it's especially interesting because I find the Japanese people, they don't exactly come across as the people who are looking for a marriage to me, when I look at like
Oh, really?
Indians. Yeah. And I think it's because they work so much. And I think because there's such a movement towards people just living alone, and um, all these artificial dolls and things that you come up with. So what do you think about that?
So that's actually a global trend. Even in the States, younger people are less interested in like dating and sex. So I would say Japan is just a little ahead in terms of that when it comes to that. So I
So
don't see anything specifically Japanese about like younger people uh, being less interested in dating.
But they do say that Japan is like currently one of the countries with the lowest birth rate and like a highly aging population. They say they sell more diapers, like old people diapers, than kid diapers. What do you think about this?
I think maybe we are kind of ahead in terms of like entertainment that you can uh, like consume without interacting with other people in real life. Because I actually that's interesting because I just saw news that says like China also has a shrinking population, and India surpassed when it comes to the population size.
China has a shrinking population, really? I thought it
That's
was
surprising,
okay.
right? At some point, they had
Yes.
to limit the number of kids, but now they have a shrinking population, just like Japan.
Hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know like the Japanese have this culture of there's a lot of pressure to succeed. And when it comes to like working very long hours, and I was watching a documentary and they said there's a Japanese term, and it's called death by being tired or death by overworking. I don't know if you know the term, and it's a very Japanese term because of the amount of hours that people work in a day. Like the I think priority is the job, right? It's the job that you have, especially I think for the men.
I think so. That thing is very interesting, but in my opinion, it's maybe because Japanese people have the tendency of blaming themselves other than blaming other people. So when things are tough, they tend to like look inside themselves rather than just, oh, my company sucks, I should just quit. So they might actually pressure themselves, or maybe it's because I'm not a good employee. So I think that's one of the reasons why that kind of thing happens.
How many hours do Japanese work on average? Do you know these statistics?
I haven't checked. I haven't checked lately, so I don't really know.
Have you ever worked in Japan, or have you always
Yeah,
just kind
yeah,
of?
I have, but my company was pretty relaxed, so I didn't have to work long hours, fortunately. But it's also because I picked that kind of company where I didn't have to work myself to death.
Yeah. And yeah, that's interesting that like so many people are under this pressure to highly perform, and work from morning until night. And then also, apparently, even when they're given the vacations, a lot of them don't take the vacations. There's a huge percentage. I think only 4% of Japanese take vacations, which is, I think, so crazy that they still want to keep working.
That's very cultural. That's very true that even if they have paid vacations, up to like 20 or 21 days maximum, depending on how many hours, how many years you've worked for the company. But a lot of Japanese people feel bad about taking like leaves because they feel like they are being selfish or inconveniencing other people by taking leaves. So that's definitely a cultural difference.
Do you feel that in your own life? Do you feel like you're a perfectionist when it comes to things, or just kind of don't relate to that at all?
Me personally, like I tried to take as many leaves as I could, so I definitely didn't feel that way. But even then, it was kind of hard
Why was it hard?
because there were things to do, like tasks, right?
hmm Do you have a lot of friends that are like, are very much like that, like very career oriented, and they say like, I don't want to be in a relationship. I just want to be alone. That's much easier for me. And I'm obviously talking about Japanese friends.
Let me think. Not necessarily. Many of my like former classmates, Japanese friends I had, many of them are married and have kids actually. So
hmm
do I know somebody who is very career oriented? And
hmm
maybe I do, but nobody really comes into my mind off the top of my head.
Okay. And let's talk a bit about more about dating. So what would you say, you've dated more foreign women or more Japanese women, or has it been just a mix of both?
Definitely more foreign women than Japanese women. Like
Is
even
there
when I was in Japan, I tend to date foreign women than Japanese women.
is there a reason for this preference?
Supply and demand.
What
So
does that mean?
that's how it always works in dating. So like you can be popular with a certain types of people than other types of people. Because if I'm in Japan, I'm just another Japanese guy. Nothing really stands out. Well, I can be a little bit different. I have my own personalities, but if they see me, I'm just another Japanese guy. But I'm a Japanese guy who both speaks English and other languages and who are familiar with other cultures. So for example, if I meet a foreign woman in Japan, she's just another person, and I don't really, you know, treat her differently, or I don't really have different expectations. So I just, interact with them normally. So of course, this kind of Japanese guy is quite rare in Japan. So supply and demand.
What is the biggest difference that you find when it comes to dating women from different cultures compared to your own culture? Um, Obviously, that, the idea of planning the date, and that, we've already talked about. Is there anything else?
Let me think, because it's more like I deal with people with on a more individual basis. So of course there are cultural differences, but there are also individual differences. And of course everybody does it, it's not just me, but based on who you are, you change the way you interact with the person, right? So
Mhm.
I just do that with like people from different countries, and so to me it feels more like I'm just adjusting the way I communicate on an individual basis, more like rather than just a broad in a more broad cultural basis.
Mhm. Yeah. I think, for me, like I've had, um, I don't really think about where I'm come from unless when I start dating someone from another country, that's when, like, sometimes when I have a culture shock, that I realize a little bit that my culture kind of comes through. Um, so, for example, I find like cultures show their love languages differently. I would say for some, like Latin Americans, they're obviously very physical. Like touch is very important, and words of affirmation. I don't know how much you know about the love languages, but there's five.
Well, everybody knows about about it, like
Yeah,
everybody.
everyone has read the book. And then when it comes to, let's say, like the more Nordic countries, there's less of the emotional and more doing acts of service. Maybe they're more their love language, like the nice things that you do for each other. So what would you say if you had to pick like a love language for you? What would be your love language?
I would say my love language is the predominant one may be like a quality time,
Mhm.
which can actually be universal. So I've
Quality
never
time,
had
yeah.
any problem. I'm actually I can be physically affectionate too, so I have no problem in like Latin America. Less about gift giving and acts of service, personally.
So you don't want to give anything. You just want to spend time with each other and touch each other.
Yeah, and I don't feel so like when somebody gives me something, I'm just okay, thanks, and I don't feel like it doesn't make me feel very, very like super, super happy or anything. Of course, I'm happy, but yeah, I don't. Some people like, wow, thank you so much, but I'm not like that.
So you don't give it, but you also don't take it. So that's actually quite,
I
balanced.
don't ask. I don't ask, And if somebody gives me a gift, I would just say thank you.
So there is this, I wouldn't say stereotype, because I would say there is this based on, it's a generalization, but that Japanese people, they find it really difficult to express the emotions verbally, like saying "I love you" and those kind of big words. Apparently, there's not really even a people don't say "I love you" very much, or there's not a term for love words. What do you think about that?
So first, I love you is a very kind of like language dependent expression. So there's no like a one single translation, to I love you in Japanese. You can use the word ski or aishiteru, which is more kind of literary. So less people say it. That's something you would, read in a book. So I find saying I love you very cultural.
Mhm.
Of course, from your perspective, the Japanese people don't say "I love you," but from a Japanese perspective, like, oh, English speakers say "I love you," so
They say "I love you" too much.
different. I wouldn't say too much, but they say it.
Mhm.
They say something that we don't typically say.
So for Japanese people, it's the English or the other cultures that say "I love you." But does that mean that Japanese people don't say "I love you"? Or
It's
is
like
it just not a
it's like
thing?
it's like what's normal for you,
Mm.
right? Of course, for us, not saying "I love you" is pretty normal. Some people say, but on average, that's pretty normal. So for us, it's like, oh, English speakers say, things that we don't typically say. So it's just, what's normal for you. So it's a this is quite relative.
It's for me, I can relate because like being Eastern European, we don't really say "I love you" to our parents that much because it's just kind of assumed that you love them. So when you say American, when you watch American movies and you hear them say, "Oh, I love you, love you, love you, love you," every time they hang up the phone, you think, why do you need to tell someone "I love you" every time you hang up the phone? Like, don't you already know that you feel that for each other? We also find that very odd. Like, but we don't do that,
Mhm.
right? So I think for maybe like a Japanese culture, it's just kind of you feel it that you're together, but is it uncomfortable to express it, or is it just how would you characterize that they just don't say it? Is there any reason that you can think of? And obviously, when you ask the fish how the water is, the fish doesn't know because it's in there, right? But you've traveled a lot, so have you thought about this? Like, why don't Japanese people say "I love you"? Besides the fact that it's something like normalized.
Well, so I'm going to give you an interesting example. So in Japan, when we come home, for example, if you live with somebody and you go to work and you come home, you would say "tadaima," which can be translated as "I'm home." And typically in a traditional Japanese household, we do this. We say it every time. And when we leave the house, we say "ittekimasu," which can be translated as like "I'm leaving." And we say this every single time, every morning. So from our perspective, like, why don't English speakers say that? It's the same thing.
Interesting. Okay. And why do they say I'm home and I'm leaving every single time?
Yeah, why don't English speakers say that every time? It's not normal for us.
Well, what if you see the
And
person
when
and you
somebody, for
Mhm.
example, if a Japanese person starts learning English, they might feel like they have to say it in English too. They don't know how to say it because it's not really the culture, right? So it's kind of a similar thing.
So let's say you see this person actually walk in the door. Do they still say it? To say
What do you
like,
mean?
so for example, I'm sitting on the couch and my Japanese husband walks in and I see him actually coming home. Will he still vocalize it and say, "Honey, I'm home," without
Yeah,
the honey?
if he's coming from work, yeah, he would say it.
I'm home.
Tadaima,
Okay.
tadaima, yeah.
So if you don't say, that's considered odd.
Like what happened? What's wrong?
So even if he's there, but he didn't say I'm home, like, I'm gonna call the police. What happened to my husband? Did he die?
Because you say
Int-
this every day, every time when somebody comes home. So if you don't say it, you will start wondering what's wrong.
That's super interesting. Are there any other like language expressions that are interesting? So, for example, I know this tradition of kokohaku, which is I find very interesting. And does that still happen? And maybe you can explain what it is for the listeners.
Yeah, so kokaku that can be translated as confession of love. And if you watch anime, you should be very familiar with it. Which basically, if you like somebody, you will tell them that if you like that person and you want to be a boyfriend or girlfriend. So that's basically what kokohaku is. And on average, it happens on the third date.
And does the sex happen before or after that?
I'm actually not really sure about that. I think it depends on the age, generation, your personality, and everything. It can be before and after, but I feel like in general, like it comes after, which means okay, we're now boyfriend girlfriend. Let's have sex.
I see. Yeah, that would make sense that the woman would wait until the man has confessed the love. So I think it's the equivalent of the American talk, like having the talk when you say, "Oh, I think we should be boyfriend and girlfriend." Although I think the talk happens much later in the
Mm,
relation or in the dating process, because
mm-mm.
you could be just dating different people at the same time. Um,
So I personally don't really like kokohaku, and
why is that?
not everybody does it in Japan. It's
Mm.
like you you have 3 dates. How would you know you want to be a boyfriend or girlfriend? So that's what I think.
Yeah, that's interesting that they'd say it specifically after, like, as you said, third date, or there's like a time period. Is it because maybe the woman is expecting, okay, so is he going to be committing himself to me? Or is this just what is this? Do you think that's why it happens on the third
So
date?
I have a theory. So I think it's partly because Japanese people tend to be more comfortable if everybody has a clearly defined role. For example, roles are very important in Japan because it might change the way you speak. Like, are you senior to me or like a junior to me? It's very important. And something that people say about Japan, one of the things is that sometimes Japanese people can act very differently depending on like uh, who they are with, and also which group they are in. For example, in school, you play a certain role. You can be like oh, you're a funny guy, but in another community, for your personality can be very different. And if Japanese people can like kind of like I don't want to say pigeonhole because it sounds not very nice, but if Japanese people know what role you're playing, they tend to be more comfortable and interacting with you because they know what to expect. So that kind of like a predictability might be important in Japanese culture, and it also applies to dating. So like I would I would guess that many people are uncomfortable if they don't know. Oh, are you just a friend, or are you my boyfriend or girlfriend? So I think they want to define each person's role pretty early on because of that.
Interesting. And let's talk about the indirectness. I remember we did a video with you years back, and that was such an interesting topic of like, I find Japan to be one of the most indirect countries in the world, right? And I don't know if I'm correct with that in that. Um, Obviously, like the polar opposite being like, I would say like the Netherlands or Israel, they're very, very direct countries. So how would that play out? Let's say if you are potentially dating someone. So for like a foreigner who's dating someone Japanese, a man or a woman, what should they be prepared for? Should they be direct, or is that going to scare the person away, do you think?
Well, obviously, it depends on who you're talking to, because some people are more direct than other people, you know. And I tend to be more direct than average Japanese people. But so I have an interesting example, which is about, let's say you go on a date with this guy, and maybe you have like 3 dates. And after 3 dates, you decided, oh, maybe this guy is not for me, so I'm not going to see him again. What would you do in this situation?
After 3 dates, well, it depends. For example, if he's still messaging me and he wants to see me again, then I will say, look, I'm sorry, I didn't really feel that we had a connection. Maybe we're better off as friends.
Right? So Japanese people are much, much less likely to say the thing that you just said, like directly. Hey, I don't feel like we are, meant to be each other. So maybe it's better we don't see each other. That kind of direct message, much less likely. It's much less likely that Japanese people say that. Uh, for example, if you are seeing this girl and you go on a date like 3 times, and if that girl doesn't want to see you anymore, she might not say that directly. She's just replying less and less, and eventually she just disappears. So that kind of thing is much more common in Japan.
Mm.
I
I
don't
think
think I have ever had a Japanese woman directly say that, oh, I don't want to see you again. But American Canadian women, yeah, they've said that to me. And I'm like, okay, I understand. Fair enough.
which do you prefer? Would you say?
I think I figure out, regardless. So I'm fine with both.
Mhm. Yeah, I think even in Canada, to be honest, we're going the Japanese way, so to speak, because nowadays there's a whole trend of ghosting each other. I mean, it's been going on for years, but if you're not interested, you just phase someone out, and then they get the point. And honestly, I've done that as well. Like I can't say I'm always very direct. Sometimes I hope that they get the point, but if they don't, then I tell them. But I was in a relationship with a Dutch guy, and he was very direct, and if he didn't like something he would just say, I think this is bad. Like that was the communication. And I was like, I, even like North Americans, they would never say that. I mean, like especially Canadians, they would always preface it with something to kind of warm you into the conversation. So they might say something like, yeah, I really thank you for saying that. I don't really feel good about this, or it could be better. But the Dutch version of it is very like cut out all the other things and just kind of get to the point. We don't have the time to waste. And that was how he communicated with his workplace. Like I used to tell him, because we lived in Portugal, you can't write an email like that. You cannot write to a Portuguese person, I looked at this file and I thought it wasn't done correctly. I was like, that's not how you write a work email. So I literally had to train him to, be more socially, like, how do you say it? Like emotionally, socially intelligent, so to speak. But I think Japanese are, in the workplace, I can imagine it's also very indirect.
So that's an interesting point, because I've also heard another theory that directness and indirectness can be different when it comes to daily communication and giving feedback, right? For example, if you are at work and if you are working for a Japanese company and you make a mistake, your boss can give you very direct feedback. Oh, you did this wrong. You have to, you have to do in a different way. Whereas maybe in North America, people can be a little more diplomatic about it. Oh, I really appreciate your work, but maybe it would be better if you do it differently. So Japanese people can be very direct when it comes to giving feedback, and it definitely kind of applies in, because I hire freelancers from different countries, and I actually find it easier sometimes to work with like Asian people, because I can give them very direct feedback. This is wrong, this is wrong, do this, and they will be like, okay. But if I do that to like American and Canadian people, they get very defensive, right? And they might not take my direct feedback very nicely.
Yeah, I think it's also maybe because Japanese are very set on doing a good job and doing it fast and being efficient, and they don't have time to waste on the politeness rituals with workers. And as you mentioned, it's a high context culture, right? So your boss is your boss, whereas like in North America, everyone's more or less, I wouldn't say equal. Obviously, there's a CEO, but he walks around in running shoes and just hangs out with everyone and is sweet and nice. So I think that's the difference, right?
Yeah, that could be one of the reasons for sure.
So let's talk about um, some of the kind of peculiar fetishes that Japanese, or at least Tokyo, is well known for. So I don't know if you have any kind of services in mind that you could tell the audience about. That might be a little bit surprising.
So yeah, that's a very interesting point, because when it comes to sexual services, we have like a whole range of very specific types of services, ranging from like, for example, a hostess club where you basically just talk to women, to like straight up prostitution. But there's so many things that are in between, and it's very compartmentalized. So
Yeah.
yeah, it can be very specific. You hire somebody for a very specific purpose.
It's so interesting because, okay, so in the rest of the world, you hire a prostitute, right? And that's like a sexual need, and okay. But in Japan, what I find interesting is that a lot of these services have absolutely nothing to do with sex. They just have to do with human connection. So, like, there's one that I've heard about where someone just cleans your ears. Like, you go and this girl cleans your ears. There's some other cafes where you just go to spend time with each other, right? Like cuddling cafes, they're called.
Yeah.
And a lot of these are just not sexual at all, right?
So I have a very interesting story about a cuddling cafe. Because a few years ago, like everybody talked about how it's weird to have a cuddling cafe in Japan, and you've probably seen one of the like Facebook posts, Twitter, tweets about cuddling cafe or an article. So one time I thought, well, yeah, everybody was talking about cuddling cafe, but like, what are they really like? I wanted to try one on my own. So I searched for it, and it turned out we actually don't have many cuddling cafes. I think I found only two in Tokyo, and both of them were in Akihabara, which is like an anime district in Japan. So I picked one. I went there and I paid like 5,000 yen maybe, which is about like $40, $30 or $40, and I experienced it. So the place wasn't very that big, but it's like it was a flat floor, but they have like, do you say partitions?
Hmm.
So they have like they have semi-private rooms, but they're not like a complete rooms. They just, you have like temporary walls. So you go inside. So first of all, if you go there, you have you have to pick a girl, but you can only pick one based on photos. So you have a bunch of photos. So you pick one, you pay, and you go inside the room, and the girl comes. And I thought it would be literally like cuddling, just sleeping side by side. But it turns out it was more like talking to the girl while you're just lying down. So it was more like a variation of a host club when you talk to a girl, but instead of like uh, doing that in a flashy place, you have a private room, and it's very relaxed because you're lying down. So that's really the concept of a cuddle cafe, apparently.
And
And
what does she do when you're talking to her? Does she
just
reply?
talking,
Just talking.
yeah, just having normal conversation.
And why do you think like these kind of cafes are? I mean, this one is semi-popular because there's only two in Tokyo, but why in general? Why build that kind of cafe for people to just lie together and talk to each other?
So we have actually, again, different types of services where you can talk to a girl or a guy. So the most common one is a hostess club or host club, where you go there. It's more like a bar or like a club where you can talk to girls. And we also have a lightweight version of that, which is called a girls bar or boys bar, which means you can only talk to. It's like you're talking to bartenders.
But it's
So
interesting that yeah, it's just talking, right? That's all it is. It's just having someone to talk
yeah,
to,
mhm.
which makes me think that there's a lot of people battling with loneliness, and that's just like a person that they need to open up to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's definitely true. Again, a lot of people, especially people in Tokyo, are uncomfortable with talking to strangers, and so kind of makes sense to pay. Another aspect is it's just an easy way to talk to a cute girl, because if you want to do that in real life, well, you have to find a girl who wants to talk to you, and it can take time and money. But if you just pay like $50, $30, you can just talk to a very cute girl who is willing to listen to you and laugh, because you're paying them. So kind of like the easy, like mood boost, something like that.
Yeah, I guess it all stems from geishas as well, right? Like historically, that's what a geisha would do. Is part of it was listening and talking, and but for me, that's so interesting that it's so hard to open up to a stranger, but to pay someone money and then know that they're the only reason they're there is because you paid them, and the only reason they're laughing and listening is because it's their job. Um, that's also very interesting. But maybe it's the whole idea of like, as you mentioned, like it's also kind of predefined. It's like they already know why they're there. They don't have to risk anything. There's no risk involved in the process.
And I actually thought, oh, it's useless because the only reason they're talking to you is because they're paying you. But I was thinking like that before, like until I tried some of the like host clubs and girls bars, because even if you know that they're talking to you because you're paying them, when you feel a bit lonely, or maybe when you're having a bad day, like talking to somebody just makes you feel good. It's like counseling. Counselors are talking to you because you're paying them. They're not necessarily interested in you in person, as a person. But if you talk to them, you might actually feel better afterwards. So it's kind of a similar thing.
Yeah, and it's statistically been proven that like human interaction is the number one factor in happiness, and actually, work is one of the least factors. When they did some studies, and they said like when you have that social connection, you feel better and you live longer. So it's completely understandable that like a city like Tokyo, I'm sure so many people are so lonely, and it's like because people work so hard, and it's just the way the city is built, right? Like it's a big city and there's so many people, but it's hard to find someone to open up to. There's a video I watched, and I don't know if you know it, but there was a guy, a Japanese guy that it was heartbreaking. He paid this group of people to organize a birthday party for him, and this group of people, all they do, their job essentially is like organizing birthday parties. But it's not that they organize the birthday parties, that they come there and they pretend to be your friends and they take photos with you, and they bring like fruits, plastic fruit. They don't even buy real food, which I found really like, what is this sham, right? But like this poor guy, he invited them, and all it was just taking photos of his happy time at his party, even though these guys were paid actors. Have you seen that video?
I have not, but that sounds very sad.
It was
That's
like
very
I'm
sad,
laughing. But it was
But
genuinely
but
like,
but it's true. A lot of people have trouble making friends. Just friends. And I have stumbled upon like a Japanese message board, anonymous one, where people were complaining how difficult it was for them to make friends. And then, I was thinking, why don't you make friends with each other, right?
yeah,
Because everybody on
exactly.
that message board wanted to make friends, and they were lonely. So why don't they? But the thing is, if they are the kind of people who can make friends with people like that, they would have made friends already. So
Exactly.
that's the thing.
Exactly. Yeah, I think maybe it's like this fear of the unknown, or it's safer to stay in a bubble and to say, okay, I don't have any friends, than to risk, because you're always with people, you're always risking in a way, right? Like someone's not going to like you, or you risk rejection. So that's why it's easier maybe to get a service like that, and just when you feel super lonely, then you go and do that. Have you done any other cafes, or have you
Well,
done
oh,
anything
I
like
have
that?
another interesting episode. So I used to actually organize dating events in Tokyo, and the one worked really well is actually ones for Japanese guys and Japanese women. It worked well because like they were less entitled. For example, I've been to like a Japanese dating event. It was like a party, and it was very difficult to talk to women there because they have this kind of attitude. Oh, you're supposed to entertain me, and I will judge you. So they're not willing to contribute. They're more like your customer, or who want to be entertained. But yeah, that particular event worked really well because everybody was very friendly, and they were willing to make an effort to talk to each other. So that worked really well. But it was very sad because when I was observing other people, how they interact with each other, I just realized that a lot of Japanese people just don't know how to talk to strangers and make the conversation going. So a typical conversation would be like, "Oh, what's your name? Where you're from? How long have you been in Japan?" End of
Mhm.
conversation. Like
Yeah.
this kind of, and they just don't know how to continue the conversation, even though like everybody is willing to talk to each other. So that was very sad. There's just so much stuff to talk about with strangers, but they just don't know how to,
Yeah.
do that.
It's the social skills, right, that you need.
Mhm.
And I think it's the fear of appearing a certain way. And I think just many insecurities maybe in their head of how they're looking and how they're sounding. And I think obviously like the more social cultures like Latin Americans and Southern Europeans, they don't overthink. And I think maybe the Japanese culture is a bit, and that's why everything works so well. Like everything is so like just, oh my god, just the amount of effort that goes into making sure everything works smoothly. And but when it comes to this, maybe there is some correlation between that and how, like if you go to Latin America, nothing runs as smoothly, because they're out socializing. Who knows? But yeah, it is really sad because, you know just that fear of talking to strangers and the fear of saying maybe the wrong thing. And I don't really know what goes on in someone's mind, but it starts from childhood, right? It's maybe how your parents brought you up, or how the schools are. And we don't have time to get into that. But
It's
yeah,
also just a simple lack of practice, because if you grew up in Tokyo, you simply don't have many opportunities to talk to strangers, like complete strangers.
yeah, that's a good point. You're right. I think anything like that is a lack of practice, because anything you need to master, you need to go out and do it. It's the same with filming. Like looking at the camera is uncomfortable when you're vlogging, but it's this like the art of doing it and doing it and doing it and looking stupid, and it's like you need to put in that time. So I think, yeah, I think the Japanese people like you that live abroad, they don't have that issue because they're just constantly out and interacting with people. Whereas if you lived in
Yeah.
Tokyo, maybe you would be not uncomfortable with talking necessarily, but you would get into a bit of that routine of just you go to work and you come home at night and watch TV and go to sleep, and you don't really interact that way, right? Your day is
Mhm.
very much work driven.
It's also like different regions. We have different regions in Japan. And for example, if you go to Osaka, people are much more sociable. It's much easier to talk to strangers. If you go to a bar in Osaka, they might actually start conversation with you, and you can actually talk to people normally. So,
Interesting.
yeah, Tokyo
Okay.
is just especially kind of antisocial, even by Japanese standards. So, other places in Japan, things can be much better in terms of communicating with strangers.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for doing this very informal chat with me. I don't want to call it an interview because I just feel like it was a really interesting conversation. And for anyone that wants to check out Yuta's channel, it's That Japanese Man Yuta. He does a lot of videos in, I think, Japanese language, especially
Yeah,
nowadays, but also just anything that you want to know about the Japanese culture. And his Instagram is here if you're watching the video. And if you're not, I'm going to link to it below so you can go and check him out. Thanks for joining.
thank you for having me.
Okay, and maybe I'll see you soon in another part of the world,
Yeah. Could be anywhere. You never
anywhere in the
know.
world. Okay, bye bye.
Okay, bye.